We'd been calling for tax cuts, you'd been calling for tax cuts, he has delivered some. The question will be, has he done enough to convince people?
In today's autumn statement for growth, our choice is not big government, high spending and high tax, because we know that leads to less growth, not more.
So what to make of Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's autumn statement? Well, I would say, first of all, that he's clearly trying to take the battle to the Labour Party. All of this talk about no big government, no high spending, no high tax. They're trying to say the opposition wants that. We want something different. Can they credibly do that when we have had a high tax and spend government for the last 13 years? Let's see. He did pull one rabbit out of the hat. There'd been heavy pitch rolling over the whole weekend that he was going to do something with tax and national insurance.
So today, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to cut the main 12% rate of employee national insurance.
To say that employee national insurance would be cut not just by 1% but 2%, and also to say that he was going to introduce emergency legislation to let that happen in January rather than in April for the next tax year is pure electioneering. He's saying that we're going to do this with immediacy.
I would normally bring in a measure like this from the start of the new tax year in April. But instead tomorrow I'm introducing urgent legislation to bring it in from January the 6th.
So he's brought forward, I think, some of these tax cuts now to try and make the Conservatives more attractive as a prospect for the next general election to the country. We've had lots and lots of talk about the historically high tax burden people have been saddled with. It's the highest since the Second World War. How far has he gone though? I mean, he's gone quite far in NI. He's talking about full expensing for businesses. He's also talking about, for the self-employed, scrapping those Class 2 NI contributions altogether. It's a minimal saving really of £192 a year, but I suppose it's symbolic. So he can say that he's helping working people, and that coupled with some of the reforms to the benefits system, and not just to say we want to reward work, it's also again saying, you know, the Labour Party, I think he even said this, want people to be on higher benefits and want to plug gaps in our employment system with more immigration and more people from overseas. He gave that line which will appeal to the Tory membership. On the business side, I mean, he announced loads of what he calls supply-side reforms, 110 measures to increase growth. The growth numbers don't quite back that up. The growth numbers aren't great and don't look particularly positive for the next 5 years.
What do those numbers add up to? According to the most recent GDP data, a big, fat zero. That's zero growth in the most recent data in the third quarter of this year.
Growth was higher throughout all of the time that Labour was in power in comparison to this. On one hand, he's talking about the biggest tax cuts for businesses in a generation.
For businesses, I've today delivered the biggest business tax cut in modern British history, with the most competitive investment allowances of any large economy.
But it's not as retail as saying we're actually going to reverse the corporation tax rise. But it certainly isn't quite as strident and sexy as saying, actually, we think that that corporation tax rise, which is so unpopular, not just with businesses, but also with Tories, should come down a bit. He keeps on talking about us having this competitive rate of corporation tax, but everybody knows that the truth of the matter is he has shaved 6% off already fragile profit margins. So I'm not sure how well that kind of biggest tax cuts for businesses is actually going to land. What I also thought was quite interesting is the changes or lack thereof to pensions. So keeping the triple lock, an 8.5% rise for pensioners, which will mean a £900 increase in the new state pension. Well, that's because the majority of older people vote Tory, and any idea of scrapping the pension and the triple lock would, I think, be, you know, electoral suicide. Overall, though, if people wanted major tax offerings like, for instance, unfreezing the tax rate bands, which have fiscally dragged lots of people into the higher 40% rate that didn't really intend on ever being there, teachers, doctors, nurses, policemen, then he hasn't done anything major on that. Also, he's talking about NI, but not income tax. I mean, a big offering would have obviously been to say, I'd like to take a penny in the pound off income tax to give you more bang for your buck and more money in your wallet. Obviously, Labour are going to be complaining about some of these cuts to benefits. We've already heard from some MPs, you know, talking about him taking away the medicine with this threat to stop the prescriptions of those who don't actively seek work, and Labour are going to make this a massive election issue. I think that the Tory party aren't compassionate and don't care about the poor. However, of course, he will be able to rely on the fact that universal credit has been put up, and actually benefits are going to be increased by the larger inflation number, that's 6.7%, rather than a lower one that has come in more recent months. At the end of the day, Jeremy Hunt is a very experienced parliamentarian, looked quite comfortable at the dispatch box. He said he was trying to paint an optimistic picture. What remains to be seen, however, is whether it makes their chances of winning the next general election any more optimistic.